Today is Saturday, April 26th. We're now approaching 100 days since President Donald Trump returned to the White House. And so far, the administration has been marked by bold, wildly debated policies covering immigration, tariffs, foreign relations, cultural touchpoints, and a lot more. Just looking at the numbers 3 months in, Pew Research found this month nearly 6 in 10, or 59%, of Americans disapprove of Trump's overall job performance at this point, while 40% approve. So what's happened so far, and what might it mean moving forward? Coming up, you'll hear from conservative commentator and senior CNN political contributor Scott Jennings, who says many Trump supporters are encouraged by the president's early actions, even if they come with some short-term turbulence. But first, I'm joined by the co-hosts of the popular podcast Pantsuit Politics, Beth Silvers and Sarah Stewart Holland, sharing their more critical take on Trump's impact across government, everyday Americans, and the future of democracy. From executive power and border policy to economic risks and trust in government, we're breaking down Trump's first 100 days from both sides of the aisle. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Beth and Sarah from Pantsuit Politics, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
So glad to be back. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So there's obviously a lot that's happened in the last 3 months. What's each of your kind of big picture summary of President Trump's first 100 days? Beth, we'll start with you.
I think the president has shown in his first 100 days that he's a different president than he was in the first administration, and much less interest in being deferential to Congress or the court system. The maximum pressure campaign to increase his power, to me, is the story of the first 100 days, regardless of what results he gets, because he hasn't gotten a lot of results for his voters consistent with his campaign promises. What he's been most successful in is testing the limits around the power of the executive.
Sarah, what's your big picture summary?
Yeah, I think the word I keep thinking of is unleashed. There were so many ideas we had about what limited him in the first term. I think the first one I was clinging to tightly was that he really watched the stock market as an indicator of his job performance and would adjust accordingly. He's really freed himself from that indicator.
Trump supporters say his historic number of executive orders is in such a short period of time is because he wants to take action. You know, voters told him to come in with a wrecking ball, and so that's what he's doing. Of course, others are saying that it's to overwhelm his opponents and distract. What is your take on his strategy with all of these executive orders, Beth?
Well, it's a historic number in part because he's using them in an unprecedented way to target individuals and individual law firms. I don't think that's what people meant when they voted for him. And I don't think that the action on the other side of those executive orders is doing what he promises, even in the text of the orders. You know, he wrote an executive order on day one about combating inflation. The economy is not looking good for anyone right now. The price of groceries has not gone down, contrary to what he says. He was just warned by CEOs that we could have empty shelves in the United States because his tariffs are affecting supply chain. So I think, yes, he is very good at show running. He produces a presidency that looks good on TV and that gives people a lot to talk about. The challenge of what we all do is figuring out what is real in all of that and what is just fodder to keep us talking about him.
And so, Sarah, have Democrats felt paralyzed and overwhelmed? And what do you make of their response so far to Trump's first 100 days?
I am seeing encouraging signs. I think that Senator Chris Van Hollen going down to meet with one of his constituents who had been deported without due process was a stellar example. I think Cory Booker's filibuster really rallied the troops. And, there's not just one Democratic Party. The Democratic Party doesn't have a leader in the same way the Republican Party has right now. And so there's going to be inherent struggles to that decentralization as people sort of grapple and take their own approaches and strategies.
Border crossings are down. Is that one area of success at all, Beth?
I think that he absolutely has a story to tell about his aggressive approach to deterring people from coming into the country. I don't know how long that will be true. It may keep people from coming. And I worry that we are going to lose the promise of America as a place that people will want to come for economic opportunity and prosperity and freedom.
Do you think it is a slippery slope, Sarah, with what he's doing in terms of deporting migrants and suspected, Hamas supporters, suspected gang members? You mentioned the case that's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court of people being deported without due process. What's your take on what's happening here?
I think what you see is this pushing on a small group of people that they think are a political winner. We're telling you they're scary and dangerous, and that's enough. They don't need due process. They don't need a hearing. They don't even need to be charged with a crime. And I think the American people are going to have to decide, is it the United States of Trump? And he gets to determine, he gets to make the call. We don't need courts. We don't need immigration judges. If two ICE agents empowered by Donald Trump want to send two German teenagers away from Hawaii because they don't have a hotel room and strip search them, then that's good enough. I think it's sparking a real conversation about what, as Americans, we owe non-citizens and how we do feel about that process.
And do you think this bleeds over to citizens, Beth?
Well, he's telling us it does. He has said that El Salvador needs to build more prison space for our homegrowns. And I am worried about that. I'm also worried just about incompetence being part of this equation. I read a story this morning about an American citizen who got a notice encouraging him to self-deport. They're trying to do so much so fast. It's a similar story to the Doge story. There's a legitimate policy goal that a bipartisan coalition of Americans support, but the method that the Trump administration uses to pursue that goal is too much, too quickly. It makes mistakes, and it erodes some of our foundational principles that are also supported by a bipartisan coalition of Americans.
When it comes to the economy, most economists agree that tariffs are not a good idea, but the White House is saying it's already brought some investment in the U.S., like from NVIDIA, and that it will bring better trade deals. Just wait and see. So what are your thoughts on the impact to the economy so far, Sarah?
I am most concerned about the weakening of the dollar. I am most concerned about the way this is playing out in the bond market. I think some are ride or die Trump, and it doesn't matter. And they're going to start to say, even as it plays out in their personal lives, I'm sure it'll be okay in the end. I'm sure this will work out well. I think, but for the majority in the middle, the idea that you should just trust us, and that as everything gets more expensive and inflation goes up and the dollar weakens and we lose investment. A member of my family was laid off because investment dropped out of a project due to the tariffs. So it's going to start playing out in people's lives in even more dramatic ways.
And when we talk about the impact to people's lives, what do you think about President Trump's cabinet? I mean, we're talking, controversial figures like RFK Jr. What's the impact of all of those actions so far, Beth?
A number of people who don't work for the government are starting to be laid off, as Sarah said, or see a contract that they've worked under jeopardized. And I think that the public has some level of patience for that, but not unlimited patience. And I think that if you start to see a primary care doctor and they can't tell you whether a vaccine is safe or not, or a drug is recommended for this fall, this flu season, I think that's when people are going to care more about RFK. I think that if they go to a store and the shelves are empty, that's when they're going to care more about Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro and Scott Bessent. I have tried really hard not to be consumed with the personalities in this Trump administration, and to not think constantly about Kash Patel as this controversial nominee at the FBI, and wait and give them a chance to act and see what effect those actions have. And I think we're just at the very beginning of that process.
Promises were made about ending wars in both Ukraine and Gaza. What's your take on what's been done so far, Sarah?
I think fundamentally, Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin are smarter and more strategic players than Donald Trump. And that's not that I don't believe either of them take him seriously and that we have no hands to play in this situation. But the idea that he's just going to say jump and either of those two men are going to say how high is not based in reality.
And so is that why he's going after Ukraine and blaming Ukraine, Beth?
Yes, I think he's very frustrated. I think the president came into office believing that these were fundamentally two real estate deals, that because there was a struggle over parts of Ukraine, parts of Gaza, Palestine, that he could wrap those real estate deals up. And I think that he is very, very frustrated that he's 100 days in, and it seems less solvable to him today than it did when he won back in November and made those promises. And so he's going to lash out where he thinks he can lash out and just get to some deal. That's how he manages in general. There will be some deals on the other side of the tariffs. He'll have something to talk about, but it will be something coming out of a crisis that he created that's a little bit better. He's a great storyteller, but with war, it's just a lot more complicated than the story that he wants to tell about what's happened.
What stands out to you as the most impactful thing, good or bad, in these first 100 days, Sarah?
The tariffs, I think, are hard to underplay. The way they have upended assumptions about America's role in the global economy and the way in which our strength was really built on those financial services and the way the dollar is fundamental to those cannot be underestimated. And even if we roll back these tariffs, even if he blinks and we stop this trade war with China, I think the way it's almost like when TikTok got shut down for those 24 hours and people are like, the vibe's never been right ever since. Could play out that way in the American economy. People have seen a glimmer of a different reality when it comes to America and the strength of the American economy that I think will be really, really hard to take back.
Beth, do you agree, or is there another most impactful thing that you would want to add?
The statement to Americans and to the world that their government is not reliable. You're fired. Wait a second, you're reinstated. We didn't mean it, but you might be fired again later. We have stepped back from agreements that President Trump himself negotiated during his first term. You know, he negotiated our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico and then came into office and said it wasn't enough. We have said to our European partners, we are not a partner to you anymore. In court, judges are starting to say, I cannot trust what government lawyers tell me on behalf of the government when they make arguments here. The sense that you don't have full faith and credit in what officials are saying is, to me, the most consequential aspect of these first 100 days.
Final thoughts on the first 100 days and what you're expecting next from President Trump.
I am expecting more impulsivity, vengeance, using the power of the federal government to pursue his own personal retribution campaign. And I'm expecting a lot more executive orders, a lot more emergencies. Everything's an emergency.
I am watching for how hard he's going to push this battle with the court system. And I am watching for what happens to the cabinet in the absence of Elon Musk. As Elon Musk steps back, I think that will create a little bit of a vacuum for people around Trump to try to establish themselves as more dominant in his thinking and in advising him. And I think that will produce some results that I can't predict today, but I know that they're going to be something to watch.
Well, don't go anywhere. Coming up, CNN's senior political analyst and conservative commentator Scott Jennings explains why he and most other Trump supporters are happy and encouraged by Trump's first few months of his second term. But first, a quick break for our sponsors. It's that time of year you're going to need to protect your skin from the sun more and more. That's why you'll want to use a broad-spectrum sunscreen every day. My newest favorite is OneSkin's SPF Face. It's my daily go-to now because I love how lightweight it is, so it doesn't feel greasy or thick on my face, and yet I feel confident knowing it's protecting and even helping my skin. In fact, OneSkin's SPFs block UV rays with non-nano zinc oxide and neutralize the free radicals that come from not only UV, but also pollution and blue light with a potent blend of antioxidants. Founded and led by an all-woman team of skin longevity scientists, OneSkin is redefining the aging process with a proprietary OS1 peptide, the first ingredient proven to help skin look, feel, and behave like its younger self. Get 15% off with code NEWSWORTHY at oneskin.co. I recommend you grab their SPF Face ASAP, though I also love and use their other products too. Again, get 15% off at oneskin.co with the code NEWSWORTHY. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and let them know we sent you. Invest in the health and longevity of your skin with OneSkin. Your future self will thank you. The Newsworthy is also brought to you by Huel. If you ever feel like you don't have enough time to make a meal or get healthy food that'll keep you going through your day, consider an option that takes no prep, no cooking. It's just grab and go and is under $5. And I'm definitely not talking about fast food. Drink a Huel Black Edition ready to drink for a perfectly balanced meal in a bottle designed by nutrition experts. Think 35 grams of protein and 27 vitamins and minerals. It takes the guesswork out of healthy eating and the stress out of not having enough time. For me, it's all about having an easy, high-protein option on those especially busy days or trips to help me feel and think and perform at my best. It's more filling and convenient than coffee and is so easy to have on hand for whenever I need it. They even have an iced coffee flavor if that's your thing, or I have the vanilla one right now. They also have flavors like chocolate, strawberry, and banana. Give Huel's Black Edition Ready to Drink a try because right now, new customers can visit Huel.com/newsworthy to get 15% off your first order plus a free gift. That's HUEL.com/newsworthy and use my code newsworthy for 15% off your first order plus a free gift. Now to my conversation with Scott Jennings. Scott Jennings, thanks for joining us here again on the Newsworthy.
Glad to be here, Erica. Thank you.
Well, first, just briefly give me your overall big picture take on President Trump's first 100 days.
Well, I think for most people, like myself, who voted for President Trump, we're pretty happy with the results. I think his best issue so far has been immigration. He has largely closed the southern border, and I think picked the correct fight on this issue with the Democrats. I think there's some open-ended questions that won't be answered for a long time, such as how his economic policies are going to turn out. Obviously, with the tariffs situation still in flux. And we still haven't seen the Congress yet pass the reconciliation bill, the one big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump says. And that also, I think, is going to determine how a lot of his first couple of years go. So with some open-ended issues out there, I think most people that voted for him and most people that I know are pretty happy with what Trump has done so far.
Yeah, and I want to go through a few of those specifics and policies that you mentioned. But first, the number of executive orders we've seen in this short amount of time has been historic. Some people are saying this is on purpose just to overwhelm opponents, distract people from other things going on. Of course, others say this is just taking action. So what's your take on the number of executive orders?
Well, first of all, I think he's been, it's fair to argue, the most aggressive chief executive since at least FDR. A lot of times people campaign and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And Trump campaigned and said those things, and then he actually did it. And really, I think, caught Washington off guard by the swiftness at which he was willing to move. And I think it's fine. I think as long as what he is doing is lawful and as long as what he is doing is within the bounds of the campaign promises that he made, I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, certainly he has to get Congress to do some things, such as enact tax policies and energy policies and other things that he ran on. But there was a lot that he said he wanted to do that he could do via executive order, and he did it.
Yeah, I mean, lawful is the question because will they ultimately be effective when many have already been challenged in court and dozens have already been blocked by judges? I mean, to list a few: transgender passport policy, transgender ban in the military, ending birthright citizenship, the deportation policy without due process that's made it its way to the Supreme Court that it's blocking. So what's your take on how many of them will ultimately be effective and what's happening in the courts right now?
These court clashes are interesting, and I think most conservatives are wanting these fights. And a lot of it, I think, revolves around this issue of whether individual district court judges can make decisions that affect the President of the United States' ability to execute their duties under Article 2 of the Constitution. Well, what we're going to find out here in May is whether the Supreme Court wants to get involved in this. Apparently, they've scheduled arguments in this argument about whether an individual district court judge can stop the president. And I personally think it's a good fight to have because although I recognize as a conservative the Supreme Court having supremacy here on making rulings that affect the whole country, I'm not sure I think it's good for individual district court judges to be able to do the same thing because effectively you could tie up a president for 4 years by individual district court rulings and never let them fully govern, even though they won an election and they have Article 2 powers as well. So we'll see how it turns out. Obviously, a lot of these things you mentioned are up in the air, right? They're going through the court system as we speak. But on a lot of these fights, whether it's immigration or on the issue of transgender passports that you mentioned, or really anything else, all of these things are areas where Trump wanted to do it, Republicans supported it, and they really relish the idea of him pushing the fight forward, even though they know some of it may get tossed out in court. To them, it's worth the fight to, at a minimum, signal to the American people, here's where we are on these issues. We're with you, and the Democrats and the courts are on a different side of it. They see this perhaps as legally advantageous in the cases they win, but certainly politically advantageous in all the cases.
So you mentioned the economy, that a lot of it is still up in the air, but let's talk about it a little bit. The New York Post reported Trump has brought in trillions of dollars in commitments to boost American industry, like NVIDIA promising to expand chip manufacturing as one example. At the same time, most economists right now, I know we had the chief economist at Moody's come on and say tariffs are a bad idea. It will cause inflation. We've seen economic growth slow down, and ultimately a recession will come if things don't change. So what's your take on how the economy is doing and Trump's strategy here?
Well, what Trump is doing is implementing a long-term strategy in which he himself has acknowledged may cause some short-term turbulence or short-term pain. You're seeing that with the market turbulence going on right now. The markets are down since he took office. That's a fact. But over time, what Trump and his team believe and what the Republicans are hoping is true is that two things happen. The tariff strategy yields better and fairer trade deals with a lot of countries. And I think in the next few weeks, you're going to see a number of announcements from the Trump White House on that front, combined with congressional action on making the tax cuts permanent, unleashing American energy, et cetera, et cetera. And so while the verdict is still out on all of this, what Trump is asking the American people to do is give him time. He's saying, look, I inherited a mess, and now I'm trying to fundamentally reorder the American and even the international global economy around a strategy that puts American workers, the working class, at the center instead of the elites on Wall Street and so on and so forth. What he has to also focus on, I think, is inflation. You have economists predicting the tariffs will make inflation worse. I'm in a wait-and-see mode. As someone who hasn't traditionally believed in tariffs, I'm waiting to see how the trade deals with our allies turn out, because it may be that he does strike great deals with Japan and Vietnam and other countries that we've traditionally been friends with. That would be a good thing, particularly if the outcome is isolating China on the world stage.
And let's talk about foreign policy a little bit. Trump has promised to end the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. How do you think all of those efforts are going at this point?
Well, on the Ukraine-Russia war, obviously, it's slow going. And even last week, I heard Marco Rubio say that if they don't see progress on this sometime soon, they're going to shift their attention elsewhere. I think it's unfortunate that they haven't been able to get to a ceasefire long enough here to try to negotiate an end to this. I hope they keep trying, because it would be a great accomplishment, even though this war didn't start on Donald Trump's watch. If he were somehow able to broker a peace deal here and end it and end the killing and bring stability to Europe, that would be terrific. In the Middle East, I do think Trump had some success early on in trying to ratchet this down and try to get the hostages back, and now trying to find a conclusion to this. I think at this point, what you want is the most stability you can get, knowing that Hamas is still very much a terrorist organization that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. I think Israel's done a good job of debilitating Hamas and Hezbollah and other enemies in the region. For the United States, obviously, the big issue is Iran and how we end up dealing with them as a global adversary. As we speak, Trump is trying to deal with Iran on a deal to keep them from getting nuclear weapons, hopefully, although that is obviously still very much going on behind the scenes, and we don't know how that's going to turn out.
I'm curious your take on what some historians are saying, that Trump's method has been a wrecking ball compared to other former presidents who have done a lot of restructuring, but in a more planned out way. Some historians are saying this is unprecedented chaos. Do you think there's any truth in that, or what's your response to those comments?
Well, if I were President Trump, I wouldn't reject the idea that I was a wrecking ball, because I think that's what the American people elected. I mean, I think the American people last November were totally dissatisfied with the status quo. They were totally dissatisfied with the experts and the elites and, the smart people in Washington. I remember the famous, statement when Biden took over, the adults are back in charge. Well, after 4 years of the adults, people were ready to wreck the adults and do something else. And I think that's what they elected Donald Trump to do. So I don't know that I would want it any other way. If I were just thinking of it as a political strategy, I wouldn't want to come in making incremental or no changes or just adjusting it around the margins. I think the American people are desperate for wholesale change.
You said at the beginning of this conversation that most Trump voters are happy with how things are going so far. And yet we are seeing Trump's approval rating fall at this point. How do you feel about the direction that the approval rating is going, and ultimately how most Trump voters are feeling, 100 days in?
I think where he's running into turbulence is among independents who are nervous about the economy. And that's not unexpected when you consider the fluctuations in the market that we've seen going on and the nonstop negativity around his plan on tariffs. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I don't think the Trump economic plan is going to work in a day. But at some point, obviously, as you approach the midterm or you approach 2028, you are going to have to look back, and voters will look back and say, Trump made a lot of promises. Did they come true? Do I feel like he put us on the right path? Of course, that's the same thing they ask about every president. We'll see how it turns out. But on the whole right now, I'm just telling you, point blank, Republicans and Trump voters are more than fine with what Donald Trump has done. And they're taking a wait and see on some of the things that are in motion but not yet concluded. But nobody that I know wishes they could go back in time and vote for Kamala Harris. That simply is not happening.
Final thought on Trump's first 100 days.
I'm pretty happy with Donald Trump right now. And I certainly think as a cultural matter, Donald Trump has taken the fight to the progressive radical left in a way that was exactly what we wanted to see on some of these cultural issues that had just been really annoying and nagging conservatives and Republicans during the Biden years. To see Trump step up to the plate and try to swing the pendulum back on a number of issues has really warmed a lot of hearts out there in the conservative movement.
Well, thank you so much to all of our guests for sharing their perspectives and insights today. You can find Scott Jennings talking politics on CNN or listen to his podcast, Flyover Country, for more news, analysis, and behind the scenes. Thanks also to Beth Silvers and Sarah Stewart Holland. Listen to their podcast, Pantsuit Politics, where they hope to make political conversations less contentious and more rewarding. You can also sign up for their Substack or check out their 2 books, including Now What? How to Move Forward When We're Divided About Basically Everything. We have links to it all on our website. Go to thenewsworthy.com/show notes. If you found this episode interesting or helpful, please be sure to share it with a friend. And of course, tune in to The Newsworthy again on Monday for our next 10-minute daily news roundup, keeping you in the know about all the different news from politics to tech and more as you start the work week. Until then, have a great weekend.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.